Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityurma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness unto light, lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Namaskar everybody, and thank you for organizing this beautiful event in this beautiful campus and in this beautiful hall. Today the subject before us is, my host was telling me, it's a tough one today, Swami. Consciousness and self in Advaita Vedanta. So what we'll do, I'll talk about it for a while, and then we'll open it up for question answers. We can discuss it more. Consciousness studies has become very important these days. In the last 20 to 25 years, it has really opened up. So many people, different subjects, it's multidisciplinary. There are, of course, brain scientists are interested in it, neuroscientists are interested in consciousness studies, but so are psychologists, philosophers are interested in it, philosophers of mind, philosophers of language, even physicists are interested, computer science people are interested in consciousness studies, AI people are interested in consciousness studies. There's this book, Waking, Dreaming, and Being. Evan Thompson is a professor of philosophy at the University of British Columbia. He writes in the introduction to the book that consciousness studies is actually not new. There are these texts called the Upanishads, more than 5,000 years ago. They are about this field, about consciousness studies. In fact, he goes on to quote another philosopher who said that consciousness studies are so important, so significant, that we should really date our history from, before Upanishads and after Upanishads. Even I, as an exponent of Advaita Vedanta, wouldn't be Advaita Vedanta is a school of philosophy based on the Upanishads. Not only Advaita Vedanta, but all these schools of Indian philosophy were more or less interested in consciousness and self. Why were they interested in consciousness and self? The focus was different from what modern consciousness studies is about. The focus was, how do you overcome suffering? The Buddha's approach is very elegant. There is suffering. Is there a way out of suffering? That was his whole approach. And in fact, that can be used to describe all of the different multiple schools of Indian philosophy. And they were all concerned with how to overcome suffering, how to attain lasting, profound peace and joy, what today we might call wellness, as a new term. But in a most profound sense, how do you attain lasting wellness? So that was their quest. In Sanskrit, Atyantika dukkha nivritti paramananda praptischa. Transcendence of sorrow or cessation of sorrow, attainment of happiness and bliss. All the schools, and since they were concerned with the self, how to attain, overcome suffering, and the self is intimately connected with consciousness. So that's how the schools of Indian philosophy, including Advaita Vedanta, they became interested in the self and in consciousness. Each of them, before I go into it any further, let me say that it's not a unified view at all. Just as today in consciousness studies, you have the entire range of views from somebody like, say, David Chalmers, of whom we'll speak later, who speaks about consciousness as a fundamental reality of the universe, across to somebody like Daniel Dennett or Churchland, who would go so far as to deny that there is anything as called consciousness. They do that. So there's a wide array of theories, speculation really about what consciousness is and how it arises and functions. Similarly, in ancient Indian philosophy, each of the schools, they had their own views about the self and consciousness. The Nyaya and Vaisheshika schools, they had their own view about consciousness and the self. The Sankhya school, of which we'll have more to say a little later, it had its own view of consciousness, the Yoga school, and of course the Advaita Vedanta school, which we'll be concerned with specifically in today's talk. The Buddhist schools developed very sophisticated views and very different views of the self. The fundamental difference between the Buddhist approach and the Orthodox Hindu approaches was that the Buddhist schools denied any persisting self at all. There is a self, but it's not a permanent persisting self, something that persists across time. They developed very sophisticated models of consciousness. There are different schools of Buddhism. The Jaina school developed its own idea of consciousness, and the okay, you need to switch that off. I remember when mobile phones first started coming in, I was in one of the schools in India teaching there, and as little kids, they asked, Swami, why do you say Shanti? Shanti is the word for peace. Why do you say Shanti 3 times? I said, there are 3 kinds of sorrows you traditionally speak about in Indian philosophy. Adhyatmik, Adidaivik, Adibhautik, 3 kinds of sorrows, 3 levels of sorrows. So you pray for deliverance from those sorrows. And then he said, you need to add a 4th Shanti, a mobile Shanti. Yeah. So the Jainas had their own view of consciousness, and so did the ancient Indian materialists. There were a wide range of materialists, actually, the Charvakas, whose views of consciousness are pretty close to the mainstream view of consciousness today, the materialist reductionist view of consciousness. So you had a wide array, a spectrum of different views of consciousness in those days. Not just Indian philosophy. Today, in Western philosophy also. I was in Manhattan a few weeks ago, and I saw there's a philosophy cafe. It's a very intellectually alive place. A lot of things are happening. So there's a philosophy cafe where the subject attracted me. 5 great unsolved problems of philosophy. 5 great unsolved questions of philosophy. I think that's a bit of an oxymoron, because all the great questions of philosophy are generally, almost by definition, unsolved. But anyway, it was very interesting. So I decided to go and join the philosophy cafe. It was very close to where I live. And so it was in fact in a building quite like this, a library. 70 people, and New York in summer is hot. It was not an air-conditioned room. 70 people packed into a room half the size of this, and an intense discussion. You might be interested in knowing what are the 5 great unsolved questions in philosophy. Let me tell you. One is, do we have free will? The old question of free will. The second one is, can we know anything at all? Skepticism regarding epistemology, so knowledge. Can we know anything at all? Third one is, wait for it, who am I? What are we really? That is really the fundamental question of Advaita Vedanta. Who am I? And then the fourth one is, what is death? Remember, not death as a physical death, that's of interest to doctors, but death to me as a psychological being, as a sentient being. So what is death to me as a sentient being? That's a great question, the question of death. And then the last question was, what is justice? The way they put it, what is global justice? So these, and why are these and not anything else the 5 great unsolved problems? Because actually Oxford University Press, you can Google it, Oxford University Press selected these. I think it's just a way to, once in a while, to boost the ratings of philosophy, But it's very good. The discussion was of pretty high quality. It was guided by philosophers from CUNY and from Columbia. My point in bringing this up is, I immediately noticed, and you will notice, 4 of the 5 great questions are directly connected with consciousness. Do you notice? Do we have free will? What can we know? Who am I? And what is death? In different ways, all these questions are vitally connected with the question of consciousness. Very interesting. So whether it is ancient Eastern philosophy, of which today's subject Advaita Vedanta is a part, or whether it is modern Western philosophy, all of them, they are vitally connected with the question of consciousness. Now, consciousness studies today, what is the really hot question, the central question today? It is something called the hard problem of consciousness. I'm bringing this up because this forms a bridge to relate to what Advaita Vedanta is talking about. The so-called hard problem of consciousness. What is that? Professor David Chalmers, who is now, he's an Australian philosopher who is now in the NYU. He's the head of the mind, brain, consciousness unit there. He coined the term, the hard problem of consciousness. Now, what is this hard problem of consciousness? First of all, what are so-called easy problems of consciousness? In modern consciousness studies, as far as I can understand, most of the work is being done with very modern new technology. They call them fMRI scans. So what they basically do is they scan our brains using these very sophisticated devices and map the firings of the neurons in the brain, and they correlate it to our activities. So you're listening to a speech, and if a scan was done on your brain, clearly some parts of the brain would light up. And so now they would say this whole act of listening is because of these neurons in the brain. You have a cup of coffee, the taste of coffee, and there'll be some part of the brain that lights up, and they will say that maybe that's the coffee tasting neuron or whatever. I don't think they get that specific, but anyway, the way David Chalmers puts it is, this whole effort, which is very good and very productive, it has given rise to a lot of new understanding about the brain, but this is basically a science of correlation. It's a science of correlation. You're finding some data and you are matching it with the subject's activities or reports. But in contrast to this, there is a huge problem, which you might call an elephant in the room. It is this. This is the first time David Chalmers pointed out the problem. The problem is this. How can a physical system, a system as physical as this podium, this wooden podium, a physical system like the brain and nervous system, how can it generate first-person experiences? Color. See, the point is, when you see something, definitely there are neurons firing in the brain. We have no doubt about that. There's no doubt about it. The brain and nervous system are working. But your seeing, my seeing, we are not seeing neurons firing. You're seeing color. You're hearing sound. When we speak, when we think, when we remember, when we love, hate, understand, forget, all the conscious activities of our life, all the first-person experiences. How can a physical system generate that? Why is it so difficult? Because every other system in the world, every other thing in the world, our current understanding is there's only one way of describing it. If you take this table, somebody from biology will give a description of what it originally was as a part of a tree. Somebody who's from chemistry who will give a description of its chemical composition. Go further down the scale, a physics professor will give you the molecular and the atomic and the subatomic, down to the maybe description of what is it at the level of quarks, maybe superstrings or whatever. And that's the description of this thing. Nobody ever claims there is something like what it is like to be a table from inside. What does the table feel like right now? There's no such thing. Nobody speaks about that. Except for you. Except for us. Here is a physical system. David Chalmers points out. Here is a physical system where one description is given by the biologists, the chemists, and the physicists, and the doctors, and everybody else. They give a description of the physical body, the brain, the nervous system. And an entirely different experience is there for you, the person inhabiting that physical system. What is the connection? What is the relationship between the physical substrate of our existence and this conscious being we find ourselves to be? See, I'm using the word consciousness in a very general sense. So I will use it alternatively with awareness, sentience, because the word I will use later on, Chaitanya, in Vedanta, it's not exactly what consciousness studies talks about as consciousness, and I'll explain why. So David Chalmers says there is a hard problem here. He calls this a hard problem of consciousness, and this has become very important. If you Google it, you will find an enormous amount of discussion going on about it, and a whole range of views. On one side are those who say there is no heart problem at all. It's just the physical brain. In fact, just day before yesterday, I got an invitation from certain professor, Kevin Michel. He's a leading neuroscientist. I'm just reading out the blurb from the book. Leading neuroscientist in Dublin and in Trinity College. He's written a book called Innate. He's a brain scientist also. He's coming to Manhattan. There's going to be a debate on consciousness at the Rubin Museum. I just heard about that yesterday. So he's going to take the position that everything that we call consciousness is generated by the brain. There is nothing apart from the brain there, nothing else that's happening. David Chalmers, on the contrary, claims that it's impossible. No matter how far you go, all you will understand, all any scientific inquiry will reveal is further and further about the brain itself. You will never make the transition from the brain to consciousness. That jump is impossible. I have heard many talks, either physically or on YouTube online, the mystery of consciousness solved, the secret of consciousness. And every time you listen to that, it's all somehow reducing consciousness to the brain states, even to quantum mechanics or to information science, all of that. And everywhere, if you look carefully, if it's a good presenter, it'll be a well-reasoned, step-by-step procedure until there's a little jump. I saw a cartoon which expressed this problem very clearly. The mystery of consciousness explained. And there is this person in white lab coats, obviously a PhD student, and his guide may be standing there. And the student has scribbled on the blackboard, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Steps 1, 2, 3 are full of mathematical notations, detailed. Step 5 is again a lot of mathematical notations. Step 4 says in big letters, a miracle. And his guide is telling him, I think you need to work on step 4. Basically, a doctor, I think, well, I shouldn't take the name unless I'm sure. I think it was Dr. Anil Seth, but it could be somebody else, who said that, no, I know who it is, who said that we know a lot about wine, we know a lot about water, but how water changes into wine, we don't know that. If water is the physical system, the brain and nervous system, we know more and more and more about it. And if wine is the experience that you or I are having now, the first person experience, internally, first person wise, we know a lot about it. Every one of us experiences consciousness. But how the two are related, that is the hard problem of consciousness. At least David Chalmers and those who have recognized it. And more important people for example, the philosophy of mind. Another conference I attended recently was in NYU on the philosophy of mind. And some of the top people were there worldwide. And you know what the subject was? That it was behaviorism and psychologism in the philosophy of mind. And they're saying that this whole approach that we have taken in the study of psychology and philosophy of mind till now in all of the 20th century, starting from Frege, who talked about removing psychologism in mathematics, down to behaviorism, Skinner, and all of that till today, it has now become a big stumbling block in our search for consciousness. The point was made, science is about objectivity, and that works absolutely fine when you're studying objects. But when you're going to study the subject itself, your whole training is to turn the thing into an object and study it. Now, if it is a subject which cannot be turned into an object, we'll see how, then you're going to miss by a wide mark. You're going to come up with desperate attempts. You can see why some scientists would say there is no such thing as consciousness. And very smart people, they're saying that there's no such thing as consciousness. So David Chalmers, what is the solution according to David Chalmers? I promise this is leading somewhere. What is the solution according to David Chalmers? He says, he advocates now something called panpsychism. It's been early around, but it's now getting a new lease of life. I remember there was a debate in Brooklyn. I think it's called the Open House or something, between David Chalmers on one hand and Edward Koch. He's the lead scientist for the Paul Allen Brain Institute. So he takes the reductionist approach, and David Chalmers took the other approach. And it ended with one of them pouring water on the head of the other person. No, it's all in fun. Come. So what's the solution? What would be the solution according to David Chalmers for the hard problem of consciousness? He advocates something called panpsychism, where he says, we may, though it sounds crazy, we may have to ultimately accept consciousness as a fundamental reality of this universe. What do you mean by fundamental reality? No need to reduce it, even to make the attempt of reducing it to a brain. Rather, just like matter and energy and time and space are fundamental factors in studying the universe, consciousness may have to be included as a fundamental reality of the universe, because it is fundamentally irreducible to the other things. In principle, he says it's irreducible. That means consciousness must be ubiquitous, it must be everywhere, and a fundamental independent reality by itself. And it interacts with the physical world through nervous systems and brains, and something like that he's talking about. Now here is the bridge. I don't know if he's aware, but more than 5,000 years ago, one of the most ancient schools of Indian philosophy, the Sankhya, it said there are two fundamental realities in the universe. One is nature, time, space, matter, energy. The term they used was Prakriti. And the other one is consciousness. So consciousness and nature, exactly the way you experience the universe. You are a sentient being, we are sentient beings experiencing a universe. So the entirety of the universe is nature. Our bodies are also nature. And brains, nervous systems, and mind. Mind is also nature. Mind is also nature. Thoughts, emotions, whatever comes as mind, that is also nature. That which experiences the external world and the internal world of the mind, that which experiences, that is consciousness, and that's what we are. That was the Sankhyan idea, this ancient school of Sankhya philosophy. The great philosopher Kapila, whom Swami Vivekananda calls maybe the first philosopher of the human race, this was the insight. Recently I had a dialogue with Deepak Chopra. Some of you may have heard of him. So before the dialogue, he said, hard problem of consciousness, but Swami, in ancient Indian philosophy, there is no hard problem, right? It is solved. In one sense, I said, you are right in one sense, but that's not helpful. If you put it that way, now ancient Indian philosophy and the modern field of consciousness studies, the hard problem of consciousness. By the way, this is only one view. If you actually look at the literature on the hard problem of consciousness, there are many who oppose this whole idea of an ubiquitous consciousness. But I think it's mostly they oppose it because they have an idea of a biological consciousness, which depends upon a physical body to be generated, to work. But there are many who oppose it. In fact, in the Philosophy Cafe, where we had this discussion, the philosopher, I won't take the name, who was discussing it, I said, what about the hard problem of consciousness? That consciousness could be a fundamental reality of the universe. He's completely against it. He says that he's a biologist and a philosopher, so that explains it. He says that consciousness is a product of the brain. Give us time, we'll explain it. We can't explain it yet, but we'll explain it in time. I said, what about David Chalmers? Panpsychism, all-pervasive consciousness, and he said, oh, him, and they're friends, but also rivals. He said, him, he gets one idea after the other, each worse than the earlier one. But I said, what is wrong with that idea? Why would you not even consider it? And his answer is very instructive. He said, if we even take it seriously, then we would have to completely change our worldview. Our worldview, which is now the materialist, reductionist worldview, this would have to be changed completely. At least we would have to have a very different look on our whole science. And I could see other people in the room, there were nearly 70 people, there more than that. Many of them were going, yeah, so you change your worldview. That's where we are at. David Chalmers, in an interview, he says, if you think long enough about consciousness, you either become a panpsychist or you go into administration. What is the Advaita Vedanta view of consciousness? The central teaching of Advaita Vedanta is this. It can be easily stated. Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art. The fundamental reality in this world is something which is called Brahman, not Brahmin the caste. It's Brahman, literally meaning, etymologically it means the vast or the limitless. God is a very limited way of describing that, but I sometimes use the word and sometimes get scolded by philosophers because of it. That's not exactly the word for Brahman, but will do. Existence, consciousness, bliss, and look at the word consciousness. The Sanskrit word for that is Chit, Chaitanya. And that is the fundamental reality of the universe. What we consider to be the reality, this is an appearance of that underlying reality. What about us? You are that underlying reality. Not you as the body, not you as the mind, not even you as the person you think yourself to be, but as an underlying consciousness which shines through, functions through, expresses itself through this body-mind complex. That thou art, tat tvam asi. Before we go a little deeper into this, let me dwell a little while. This is one of my, what do you call them, hobby horses or something? A favorite idea which I play around with a little bit. That thou art, that is the ultimate reality. Thou is you or I, the individual being. If we knew ourselves as we really are, Swami Vivekananda, when he came to this country more than 125 years ago now, this year, he would say, if only you knew yourselves as you truly are, not as a body bound to die, age and decay and die, not even as a mind, a changing little limited personality, but as an unlimited consciousness expressing itself through a mind and a body. If only you knew yourself as you were, as you are. That thou art. Now, technically, in Vedanta, the word that, curiously in Sanskrit, the word is almost exactly the same English word, tat. In English, you would write it as T-A-T. That. Technically, it stands for the Vedantic equivalent of God, Saguna Brahman. Thou, you, the individual being, stands for the Jiva, the individual sentient being, us. Now, literally, the sentient being, you or I, we are not God. Clearly, often the dualistic religions, both non-Hindu and Hindu, the dualists attack the non-dualists on this. This is blasphemous. You are claiming to be God. That's not exactly what we are claiming. When you transcend the limited personality, there is the divinity within each of it. In fact, it's an intuition that mystics in every religion have had through the centuries. Every religion. Meister Eckhart is one of the most very non-dualist medieval Christian mystics. He writes, the ground of God and the ground of my own being are the same, are one and the same. The ground of God and the ground of your own soul are one and the same, which means there is an underlying reality which we do not know about ourselves, and there is an underlying reality to God also, which is one and the same. Now, what's this idea I want to put before you? It's an interesting idea. Not mine originally. It was an Advaita teacher in the Himalayas from whom I heard it first. He says, all human spiritual endeavor, all seeking, all of us, most of us, I'm sure we are spiritual seekers. That's why we are coming for a talk like this. All of us and all the great religions of the world, they can be put in these two categories. That and thou. The that category is the religions and the spiritual seeking which is God-oriented. I was teaching in the monastery in India for 8 or 9 years. I asked the young men who were coming to become monks, I asked them, why do you want to become a monk? And neatly they would fall into two groups. One group would say, we are searching for God. We are searching for God. That oriented. And another group would say, well, God is fine, but who am I? What am I? The third question of the 5 great unsolved questions. What am I? I'm searching for the mystery about my own existence. The thou. If you look at the great religions of the world, you will find some of them are that oriented, God oriented. So the great Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they're all God oriented religions. That's why in this country, sometimes people find it difficult to accept something like Buddhism as a religion, because it's not about God, and yet it is a religion. But not so in India, because in India we have had both kinds of religion for a very long time. Buddhism itself is 25 centuries old, 2,500 years. Jainism is even older than that. So that's a God-centered approach. And there is a thou, that is self-inquiry based approach, an approach based on who am I or what am I. So a self-inquiry based approach, I don't want to use the word self-centered approach. So self-inquiry based approach, a thou-centered approach to religion, and a that-centered approach to religion. And each has its interesting strengths and weaknesses. A that-centered religion would be about God, would be centered around temples or churches or mosques, would generally have more of devotion, what we might call bhakti, and would have more of rituals. In general, I'm making a general statement. The problem with the that-centered religion, God-centered religion, is this. God is difficult to prove. If you don't know what I mean, look up Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens online. So God is difficult to prove. In all the that-centered, God-centered religions of the world, you will find strong theological traditions of trying arguments for the existence of God. I can see some of you nodding their heads. Those who have studied religion or philosophy, you know. There are Thomas Aquinas, for example, or in Hinduism, Udayanacharya, the great logician who lived more than 1,000 years ago. So they developed these arguments to prove the existence of God. Why? Because the existence of God is based on faith. There's always a possibility that God does not exist. It's always open to attack. Always there have been skeptics. So that centered religion, the problem with it is, does God exist at all? If God exists, perfect. God is all-powerful, omniscient, omnipresent, all of that. Great. Only if He exists. If He, she, it exists. On the other hand, the thou-centered, self-inquiry-based religions, by which I mean Buddhism, I mean Jainism, or in the Hindu traditions, I mean Sankhya, or even the Patanjali yoga system. Notice I'm not including Advaita. These traditions, they don't have this problem, because they are not about God per se. They are about inquiry based on oneself. And we exist. Nobody seriously has tried to prove the existence of oneself. Nobody. Even the Buddhist denies a specific view of the self. But that, in some sense you exist, nobody denies it. It's obvious. Nobody has long, convoluted arguments. Nobody has, if you look up debates on the existence of God online, you'll find so much. Debates about my existence, nothing, almost nothing. So we all know that we exist. There is no problem there. The subject matter of the thou-centered, the self-inquiry based religion, I, me, myself, that's there. Even Descartes, who started out doubting everything, his great project, he could not doubt his own existence. You know the famous cogito ergo sum, that I think, therefore I exist. I saw this cartoon, I think it was in this philosophy magazine, Mind, it had a whole issue on humor. So there's this cartoon, Descartes is sitting in a Parisian cafe, and the waitress asks Descartes, more coffee, monsieur? And Descartes says, I think not, and immediately disappears. You know, I think, therefore I exist. So that is not a problem with the self-inquiry based religions, our own existence. But what is the problem? Our own existence is fine. We do exist. But that itself is the problem. It's a miserable existence. I have suffering, I have sorrow, I'm surrounded by so much misery, death and loss and desire and frustration. All of that is the problem. And on the other hand, God, whose existence is a question mark, but if God exists, God has none of these problems, because God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. So you have a perfect but doubtful existence. Here you have a certain but very imperfect existence. Now the beauty of Advaita is, what it does is, it combines the two to get the advantages of both, and removes the disadvantage of each. What Advaita does is, when it tells you that thou art, you come to a certain perfect existence. That is what Advaita calls pure consciousness or Chaitanya. Pure consciousness is the term I'm using because it's current. Chaitanya, Chit. By the way, none of this is actually theoretical or speculative, just a claim, as we shall see. We'll end this talk with an actual exercise to indicate, point out what Advaita means by pure consciousness. So the beauty of this approach, Advaitic approach, is it talks about a perfection within, an immortal, beyond death, beyond suffering, unchanging reality, which affirms the fundamental reality of the entire universe, and which you are already. Only you have to take cognizance of that, realize it, and express it in life. As Vivekananda said, each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity within. And all of religion he considers as a process of manifesting this divinity within. So that's the claim of Advaita Vedanta. A perfect, certain existence which is you yourself. Now that's a really big claim. Can you, what's the word? Put what where your mouth is, your money where your mouth is. What's the phrase? Yes. Let's see where, how it works in actually. How do you prove that? How do you show that? In fact, in one of the ashrams in the Himalayas, in Haridwar, there was this interesting incident. A monk asked a teacher of Vedanta, Advaita, give us an indubitable, irrefutable proof of the existence of God. Look at the question. An irrefutable proof of the existence of God. Now, person who's asking, he knows all of the theological arguments for the existence of God. By the way, if those who are not trained in philosophy or theology, if you're, in case you're curious, there are actually proofs of the existence of God. I didn't know that. Don't be too excited. If you are already convinced about the existence of God, you will just find them nice, the proofs. If you are not convinced by the existence about the existence of God, these proofs will distinctly underwhelm you. So they are all very nice efforts. Many books have been written about them. But this monk asks the teacher, give me an irrefutable proof of the existence of God. And the Advaita, the non-dualist teacher, says, your own existence. Ishwar ke astitva mein akatya praman dijiye. Give me an irrefutable proof as to the existence of God. And the monk replied, Aapka astitva, your own existence. And that makes sense only in the Advaita Vedanta paradigm, because your own existence, the reality about ourselves, is actually the reality of God, even as Meister Eckhart intuited. Before we go into the actual teaching, is there anything more? Yes, just one more thing. And this is something that David Chalmers himself has pointed out on a number of talks. Consciousness is a little different from all the other major scientific endeavors here. If you're talking about black holes or quantum mechanics or string theory, this is not something that we normally experience. It's not, the data is not normally available to the ordinary person. It's not something that we normally come across in day-to-day life directly. But consciousness is something that every one of us has access to. All of us, we think, we remember, we desire, we see, hear, smell, taste, touch. In fact, if you think about it, what we call life, our lives, is just a series of conscious experiences, experiences in consciousness. Everything is experienced in consciousness. Consciousness is the fundamental datum of life. Why wouldn't we be interested in consciousness? That's very interesting. Why? I was just thinking today, why did consciousness studies start so late? It should have been the first thing to be studied. And in fact, in human history, probably it was the first thing to be studied in the Upanishads when you go back. So it is the fundamental datum of our life. We should all be interested and excited about it, whatever position you take, because it is what we are. So no, I am this body. I'm not this strange thing you're talking about, hard problem of consciousness or Vedanta or whatever. I am the body. Well, I am the body only because I am aware of the body. I am claiming that I am the body only because I have a conscious mind capable of noticing the body and claiming that I am the body. Everything that we know, what we fight about, what we agree and disagree upon, everything is in consciousness. All the science that we do, the religion that we do, the theists and atheists, the art and literature, everything that we have done in human life till today is in consciousness. It is the single most important thing for us. So, all right. So, Advaita Vedanta claims that consciousness is the fundamental reality of the universe. Everything in the universe is a manifestation of consciousness, and we are that consciousness. The word it uses is Chit or Chaitanya. One more point. I'm just pushing up the main thing what I want to do today. One more point. What is the relationship between consciousness and its objects? Consciousness and its objects. I'm going to give you 4 theories. Again, none of them are mine. It's so nicely a teacher of Vedanta put it in one of the classes in Haridwar. 4 approaches, and you'll see how modern it is, how very, very much applicable to our modern understanding of the world. There are 4 possible approaches which we can speak of, relating awareness to the world, including your own body and mind. Relationship between consciousness and its objects. The first one is the prevailing worldview today in science, is that consciousness originates from the object. Object is primary, matter is primary, and from that consciousness is an epiphenomenon. You know, the general worldview. Matter is in planets and stars, and then somehow in life originates, and somehow living matter evolves into more sophisticated forms, evolving brains and nervous systems, and in those brains and nervous systems, somehow again, miracle, consciousness appears. So that's the reductive approach. Consciousness is nothing but a byproduct, and the physical body-mind is the main thing. That's the main thing. So object is primary, consciousness is a product of the object. That's one worldview. And it's the modern materialistic worldview, scientific worldview. The second possible worldview is the opposite. Object, matter, universe, all of that is a product of consciousness. And this is the worldview of all religions, the theistic religions. God created the universe. Why am I saying consciousness instead of God? Because if you ask all the religions of the world, is your God a conscious God or an unconscious God? A conscious God. A conscious God. So somehow a conscious being created the universe of space, time, matter, energy. That's the traditional theistic religious worldview. That's another option. The third option is neither created the other. They are fundamental realities and they interact with each other. If you think this is what David Chalmers is saying, you would be right. This is what he's proposing. And yet exactly this is what the ancient Sankhya and Yoga philosophies proposed. Consciousness and its objects are independent realities, but they interact with each other. In Sankhya, Purusha Prakriti, consciousness and its object. They interact. Where do they interact? The interaction is what you call yourself. You are what is the interaction of consciousness and the world, the universe of matter and energy. That's the third worldview. Why am I saying all this? My point is the fourth one, which I'm coming to, the Advaita worldview, the Advaita Vedanta worldview. Not that object produces consciousness, not that consciousness produces an object, not that there are two fundamental realities interacting with each other, but the radical claim of Advaita Vedanta is there is one non-dual reality. Non-dual means not two. That's the meaning of Advaita, not two. And that non-dual reality is consciousness. Why do you call it non-dual? Because it appears to be two, consciousness and a world out there. Advaita says consciousness alone appears as its object. A good example would be what the mind does in dreams. It's the mind alone which appears as you, the dreamer, in your dreams and your world of your dreams. People, things, events, all of it is the mind. Much in the same way, consciousness appears as this entire universe, as the world out there, as the bodies, even as the mind. Remember, for those who have a philosophical training, Advaita Vedanta is not Berkeleyan subjective idealism. It is not subjective idealism. It's not saying that you are imagining the world out there. Rather, consciousness is appearing as you and the world. As Vivekananda put it, one alone exists. It appears as nature, soul. All right, enough beating about the bush. All of this was beating about the bush. Now, in the time remaining to me, let me point out what Advaita means. Let's do this together. Advaita Vedanta claims that this consciousness it talks about, this non-dual reality, Brahman, Atman, pure consciousness, whatever you call it, it's available here and now, and it's you. And it can indeed be experienced, within quotes, experienced. Remember, the journey in Advaita Vedanta is not a journey in space. We are not talking about going to a place called heaven, some other place. No, it's here. It's not a journey in time. We are not talking about something that will happen, after the next incarnation, or after the coming of the Christ, or after the apocalypse, or after death. The word after is a time word, before and after. Or even after enlightenment, not even after enlightenment. It's now, it's here and now, and it's you. It's not a journey in space, it's not a journey in time, difference to knowing. How do you do this? How do you do this? They have methodologies, protocols you might call them. They are called prakriya. Prakriya means particular methodologies given in Advaita Vedanta. For example, there is something called the Drigdrishya Viveka. There is something called the Avasthatraya. Drigdrishya Viveka means an inquiry into the seer and the seen. Avasthatraya Vichara, an inquiry into the three states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. The book I referred to at the beginning, Evan Thompson, Waking, Dreaming, and Being. So an inquiry into that. Or Pancha Kosha Vichara, an inquiry into the 5 layers of the human personality. So these are different techniques which take us step by step in our understanding and points out that reality which Advaita claims we are. And we'll do one of them today, just to give an idea of what we are talking about here. The process of doing this is, first you listen to me. Listen to me in the sense, how do you listen? I like this teaching of a Tibetan Lama, who said they undergo rigorous training in the Tibetan monasteries. So he said, before we start our course of studies, the instructor tells us how to listen. So how do you listen? Not like, he gives the example of 3 pots. Upside down pot, dirty pot, leaky pot. Don't listen like an upside down pot. Upside down pot is, when you pour water on an upside down pot, nothing is retained, it just flows off. So don't listen like that. After the hall, what was it about? I don't know, some curious guy in orange said some strange things. Upside down pot, no. You should be able to say, this is what the guy said. By the way, the orange gets interesting reactions. Just now we were walking down here and somebody was showing me, Aditya was showing me around, and this guy walks past and says, nice dress. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was in Sedona. It's a beautiful place, a high desert in Arizona. And we were climbing these rocks, and there was another group of visitors, young boys and girls, and I could hear them talking. They don't know, the voice carries a lot in the desert air. One of them was saying, oh, look, the Dalai Lama. Not even the Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lama. Yes. So don't listen like an upside down pot. Retain what you have listened, at least to the extent of being able to say, this is what the guy said. Then second is dirty pot. So dirty pot is, I come with a clear intention that what this guy is going to say is wrong. It's good to be skeptical. It's good to have a questioning attitude. You must. Vedanta is the path of knowledge. It's not based on faith. That's why I have a problem when in this country religions are called faith, umbrella term, faiths. But Advaita Vedanta is not faith. It's not faith. It's based on understanding. It's like if you go to a professor's class and hear math or something, and the professor says, do you get it? And you say, oh no sir, but I believe you, you are great, I believe you. You have the professor tearing out his hair. You don't, I want you to get it. That's what Advaita Vedanta is. So, dirty part is I come with a skeptical attitude. I made up my mind. The professor is wrong. The textbooks are lying. Everything is, everything is fake news. So, so I don't. If you come with that attitude, again, we don't learn anything. That's a dirty part. And the third one is leaky part. You know what it means. I hear, I get it, but I lose it very soon. By the time I'm gone, it's again empty. So you don't listen like an upside down part, dirty part, leaky part. So that's the first thing, you listen. The second process is question. Listening has come to an end when you can say, this is what the teacher said. Then the next question is, I have heard what you said, but I have all these questions. So that is the second phase, reasoning. And the third phase is, once you have heard what the teaching is, once you have asked the questions and you've got a clarity about the teaching, then immerse yourself in the teaching, marinate in the teaching till it becomes alive for you. The Sanskrit terms for these are Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Literally hearing, reasoning, and meditating. Okay. 3 processes. Now we are going to do it. I'll take up the most direct of the approaches. What is the point here? I just made a claim, Advaita Vedanta made a claim, you are not the body and mind, you are an unchanging witness consciousness, a pure consciousness. We are trying to see that, because if it's here right now, I should be able to grasp, again within quotes. The method is this. I borrowed this from a book written about 700 years ago by a medieval philosopher in Karnataka, North Karnataka, South Andhra Pradesh in India, Vidyaranya. Probably he was the author. Drigdrishya Vivek, a short text. The first verse itself, first verse gives us the method. What is the method? Let me chant the verse and we will walk through the method. Rupam drishyam lochanam drik, tad drishyam driktu manasam, drishyadhivrittaya sakshi, drigeva natu drishyate. 4 steps we have to go through. What are the 4 steps? Let's see. First one, we have to have an operating principle here. The principle is the seer and the seen are 2 different entities. The eyes see this bottle. Clearly the bottle is something different and the eyes are different, physically different entities. The experiencer and the experienced are physically different entities. In fact, the limit of the vision of the eyes is not distance. You can take a binocular or a telescope and even the furthest celestial body will be available for seeing. It's not even size. A microscope will reveal this tiny things to your eyes. It's actually, this is the limit of your vision. The eyes cannot see themselves. And no, a selfie is not seeing your own eyes. It's a picture of your eyes. Nor is a reflection in a mirror seeing your own eyes. You're seeing a reflection of your eyes, not the eyes themselves directly, the way they see other things. So the eyes and the things they see are different. They're different entities. First quarter, the first step says, the eyes are the seer and the forms are seen. Rupam, drishyam, forms are seen, eyes are the seer. Note that they are different. Whatever you see is different from the eyes. What's the point of this? You'll see very soon. Note also, you see many things with the same pair of eyes. The seen are many, the seer is the same pair of eyes. Note also, whatever you see keeps changing. You saw something outside, you're seeing something now, very soon you see something else outside. The seen, the objects you experience keep changing. The experiencing instrument is more or less the same. 3 points. Seer and the seen are different. The seer is one and the seen are many. The seer is unchanging relatively and the seen are changing. First step. You are like, yeah, I get it. Get on with it. Second, we go deeper now. The eyes themselves become seen in the sense that I'm aware my eyes are open. I'm aware I can't keep my eyes open because this guy is boring me so much. I'm aware of what my eyes are. I need glasses. My eyes are very good. I don't need glasses. All these things about my own eyes, my mind is aware of it. The intellect is aware of it. So the mind is the seer. And the eyes are the seen. Seen in the sense of known, within quotes. What about the world? Still known through the eyes. What about the eyes? Known now through the mind. Mind seer, eyes seen. Not only the eyes, ears, nose, skin, tongue. In fact, the whole body is experienced, isn't it? It's an object of experience. So the mind is the seer, and the body, eyes, and the rest of the body is a seen. Clearly, the mind is different from the body in whatever sense. Nobody says the mind is exactly the same as the body. Even the materialist, reductionist will say mind is a kind of a byproduct of the physical body. All right, so far. Mind is different from the body. Mind remaining more or less the same. It experiences different states of the body and the sense organs. Mind is the remaining more or less the same, unchanging. The body is changing continuously. We see that. Deeper. And now the magic starts. Third step. The mind itself, drishyadhivrittaya, the modifications of the mind itself are experienced. And you are the experiencer. What do I mean by that? When I am happy, I feel it. I know I am happy. When I feel pain, I am unhappy, miserable, depressed. I know I am miserable, depressed. I experience it. It would be so strange to say, I am really, really miserable, but luckily I don't feel any of it. That sounds so silly. I am delighted, but I don't feel it. It's so strange to say that. We actually feel it. We experience it. The states of the mind are experienced. If you look into yourself, there's a word for that, introspection. Our own thoughts. A psychoanalyst makes his living out of it. You have to tell him your dreams, your thoughts, and all of that. So our mind is also experienced. If the mind is experienced, then there must be an experiencer of the mind, something experiencing the mind. And the experiencer of the mind must be different from the mind. This is because the principle we adopted, seer and seen, are different. So that which experiences the mind, the word used is witness. Why? Because it witnesses the mind, sakshi. And it is consciousness. Why is it consciousness? Because it is aware. Clearly you are aware of the mind. What about the body? Still the seen. What about the world? Still the seen. World is seen through the body and the eyes. The body and the eyes are seen through the mind. The mind itself is seen by the sakshi, by the witness consciousness. Don't say my witness consciousness. You are the witness consciousness. You watch the mind. You experience the mind. And already it's a very interesting territory. There's a classic story about how this works. You can easily apply it to your life. There's this person in here, at least not here, you're in a much more sane place. In Manhattan, people rush to their therapist. In India, you would say, who's your guru? In Manhattan, who's your therapist? So people rush to the therapist, I'm miserable. So in India, people go to the Swami and say, Swami, I'm miserable. This person goes to the Himalayas, to a monk and says, I'm miserable, I'm unhappy. Please help me. And the monk said, are you aware of your unhappiness? Do you feel it? You know where this is going. So this man says, yes, of course I feel it. That's why I've come to you. I'm miserable, I'm unhappy. And then he says, the monk says to him, if you feel your unhappiness, if you feel your misery, then it's an object. It's something in the mind that you're feeling. Just as you would see that this shirt which you're wearing or a little boil on your hand, that would be an object. In the same way, unhappiness in the mind which you feel is an object. If it is an object, if you feel it, you are the knower, it is the known. And the knower and the known are different. Therefore, if you feel unhappiness in the mind, you are not unhappy. You are the knower of the unhappiness in the mind. And this person thought about it. And actually if you do this, immediately what happens is a kind of psychological space opens up between you and your thoughts, feelings, emotions, desires, prejudices, whatever. A little space opens up. A very luminous space opens up between you and the mind. And the mind calms down. That's the magic of it. The mind actually relaxes. And this person comes back to the teacher and said, oh, you're right. I'm the knower and the misery was something known in the mind. I am so peaceful now. And the teacher immediately scolds him. No, you are not peaceful. You are the knower of the peace in your mind. That is important to know, because that's the trap the mind lulls us into. What would have happened? He thought that I am the knower of the misery in the mind calms down. Oh, now I'm so peaceful. It's the mind which is peaceful. The moment he comes down from the Himalayas and drives to Delhi and gets caught in the traffic jam, he will immediately lose the peace of the mind. He'll think, I was so peaceful in the Himalayas. I was reading recently there was some kind of tension between India and China, and some Chinese newspaper threatened that don't the Indians know that the Chinese army can be in New Delhi within 24 hours? And somebody quipped back in an Indian newspaper saying that that's impossible. Delhi is heavily defended on all sides by traffic jams. Nobody can be in Delhi in 24 hours. You would lose your peace of the mind and you think that I was peaceful there and I'm disturbed again. But you are the undisturbed witness of the peace of the mind, of the disturbance of the mind, all of that. And that witness is never disturbed. That is permanently at peace. The Mandukya Upanishad says that witness is Sakshi. The name of that is Shantam. You are not peaceful. You are peace itself. That is the witness consciousness which Advaita speaks about. Now immediately our tendency is, that's great. How can I know it? The last quarter of the verse is a big downer. It says, Drigeva natu drishyate. You can't know it. But wait a minute. What it means is not that it is unknowable. It is more than knowable. That alone shining, everything else is known. You see, there's a beautiful mantra in the Upanishads. Tameva bhantam manubhati sarvam. Tasya bhasa sarvam idam vibhati. That shining, everything else shines. By its light, everything is illumined. What it means is, you shining, everything else in your world shines. By your light, everything in your world is revealed, good and bad. You have to switch it off, sir. Everything in your world is revealed by you, the light. Don't say my consciousness or my witness. I, the consciousness. I, the witness consciousness. It can never be objectified. It can never be objectified. You cannot know it as an object of the instruments of knowledge. It can never be an object of epistemology. Why? Usually, what we cannot objectify in our knowledge, we say such a thing does not exist. Because we don't know it, we can't know it. But here, it is that which makes all knowledge possible. Our eyes can see, the experience of seeing is because of that witness consciousness, that light within. Experience of hearing is because of that light within. Light I'm using metaphorically. Experience of taste, of thinking, of remembering, of questioning, of understanding, of forgetting, of not understanding, all these first person experiences are because of that light. The very nature of that light, the term used in Vedanta is swaprakasha, self-luminous. There's a lot of literature on this, very sophisticated thinking on this. This is basically Advaita's answer to the hard problem of consciousness. That there is a fundamental reality which reveals itself and everything else in the universe, which gives us this first person experiences. Technical term for that nowadays is qualia, first person experiences. It's possible because of this consciousness which we are. Bodies change, born, change, age and die. Consciousness unchanging. It is immortal and undying. Minds are subject to ups and downs, misery, depression, elation, waking, dreaming, sleep, all mind. Consciousness reveals miserable mind, happy mind, and so on and so forth. So consciousness is unchanging. Misery is in the body-mind level. At the level of consciousness, that misery does not exist. If you say, no, why can't that consciousness be unhappy? If it is unhappy, I would say, does it feel unhappy? Then unhappiness is an object which it reveals. It is not unhappy. Yeah. Should I go on? I think I have made the point, the real point I wanted to make. Just one more point. I'll just add one thing, and then we'll go into the Q&A. And we have also nicely arranged it. Yeah, it's exactly 1 hour. How acceptable is this? I'll give you one example. One of the bitterest critics of religion today is Sam Harris. If you Google him, you'll find out a lot about him. Bitter critic of religion. And he wrote a book Waking Up, in which he says that there are these two traditions at least, Advaita Vedanta, which we are talking about here, and Dzogchen Buddhism, the Dalai Lama, Dzogchen Buddhism. Yeah, the Tibetan, that's the core philosophy of Tibetan Buddhism, the most advanced form of Tibetan Buddhism. Advaita Vedanta and Dzogchen Buddhism, where he says there is a core of truth in these traditions which I cannot deny. And he says we must investigate this. For that, a lot of atheists were upset with him. Richard Dawkins was upset with him. So that's one. Another one, just recently, Robert Wright, who is an evolutionist, neo-Darwinist. He lives in Princeton. He has written books like The Moral Animal, The Evolution of God. His latest book is Why Buddhism is True, completely from an evolutionary psychology perspective. He says the insights of the Buddha, they are valid. We see now. Not only are they valid, so all right, so they are valid now, we have come to it by modern psychology and evolutionary theory, so it's all replaced, it's redundant. It's not redundant, because the practices he gave, he makes an interesting point. I understand what the Buddha was trying to do, I understand it from a Darwinian perspective, from a modern psychology perspective. But having understood it, I still cannot overcome suffering. I still fall into the same traps. The hedonist trap, the pleasure trap. I fall into the same traps again and again, even understanding from an evolutionary perspective what is happening. By practicing some of the meditation techniques given by the Buddha or in the Buddhist tradition, I find I'm able to manifest my understanding in my day-to-day life, even to the little bit I have practiced. I'm quoting him. In that sense, there's a new movement called naturalized Buddhism. I claim, I would offer that Advaita Vedanta, some forms of Buddhism are very much applicable, very much real, entirely verifiable. Vivekananda said, I am firmly convinced that the claims of religion must be subject to the same tests which scientific claims are subject to. If by that we find something is false, no matter how beautiful, we have to give it up. Because ultimately that which is not false, in the long run, it is not conducive to good. But he says, I am confident that the core truths of religion will stand the test. And he uses a word which I found very significant in terms of the hard problem of consciousness. Vivekananda, he says, why is confident? He says, because religion has an internal mandate which science does not. By internal mandate, I think this direct first-person experience is meant. I rest my case. Thank you very much. Thank you. The microphone will come to you. Yes, there's a hand here. Please tell us your name, and then next we'll go here. There are microphones on two sides. All right. The first is, why do we need it at all? Was that the question really? Broadly speaking, why do we need all this at all? Same thing, which the first thing which I said, which Buddha's whole project starts with that. In fact, the entirety of ancient Indian philosophy, whether Buddhism or the different schools of Buddhism, or Jainism, the different schools of Orthodox Hindu thought, we are all concerned with overcoming suffering and attainment of lasting, profound peace and joy. Now, nobody will ask, why do I need to overcome suffering? I do this because I want to overcome my suffering. I do this because I want lasting happiness and joy. Those are fundamentals. We seek that. And so this Advaita Vedanta, what it claims is, what you are searching for is already there. We are like people who have been left maybe by a rich uncle, you have been left millions of dollars and you're on welfare. Why? Because yes, technically I'm a millionaire, but I don't know which bank it is in. I don't have the checkbooks and I don't know where it is. Technically I'm a millionaire, but present right now. You need to notice it, claim it, and work on it to manifest it in life. That Vivekananda said, not just knowing it, he said, manifesting the divinity within. Very interesting. Simple words. Even school children these days memorize these definitions. But manifesting the divinity within. So that perfection has to be manifested in our day-to-day life, in our thoughts, words, and deeds. Second, ego. In Vedanta, there are precise definitions. You will be interested to know even consciousness. I'll come to that later. But first, ego. What is ego in Sanskrit, in Vedanta? Ahankara. It doesn't have to be Vedanta. In fact, all the schools of philosophy, they have very precise definitions. The reason they have precise definitions is they went through a long process of debate, tremendous, gladiatorial combat, not physical combat, not violence, but rather intellectual combat. Buddhism and classical Hinduism, they went through a period of nearly 1,000 years of debate, primarily on 2 points: existence of Atman, existence of God. And it led to a great refinement of Hindu philosophy, of Indian philosophy, not just Hindu philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, Jain philosophy, and the different schools of Hindu philosophy. So everything had to be precisely defined and defended. Ego, ahankara, abhimanatmika antakarana vritti, which means that which appropriates to itself the functionings of everything around it, in the mind. So pain, I am unhappy. This flash of desire, I want. Where did the I pop in from? There's want. But that I, which coordinates all these activities and appropriates it to itself. That's what is that ego? It's also a function of the mind. It is also something revealed by consciousness. It's an important point, really important to hold on to it. You are not the ego. I am not the ego. The feeling of I in the mind, I am listening, that's also a thought in the mind. Consciousness is what reveals the ego. In the famous hymn by Shankaracharya, we have all heard it, most of us. That Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. I am of the nature of Shiva, I am of the nature of pure consciousness and bliss. The first line, Mano Buddhyankara Chittani Naham. What does it mean? I am not the mind. I am not the ego. I'm not the mind. I'm not the intellect. I'm not the memory. I'm not the ego. Ahankara Naham. If you translate into English, what an interesting thing it turns out to be. I am not I. Is that paradoxical? No. Right now we see, by this method of seer and the seen, are you aware of the functioning of the I? I mean the vertical I, not this. Are you aware of the I? Yes. The ego functions. It has a function. It is a psychological function. Of course, when we say egotistic, we mean something else. Arrogant, presumptuous, and so on. But ego has a function. It appropriates itself. Abhimanatmika. Abhiman means possessing everything. Swa is the Sanskrit word. Mind. I, mine. It's a function of the mind. It's not you. There's a let's try this. It's interesting actually. I can actually demonstrate what is exactly the witness consciousness and what is the ego. Let's see. And this was something given by Greg Goode, Goode. He is a psychologist working in, a counselor working in New York, and very heavily inspired by Advaita Vedanta. So he pulls those traditions into his counseling. So he says, try to locate the ego. We'll go do an exercise. Just relax and follow it within yourself. The feeling of I, the feeling of I. Draw mentally, no, you have to keep your eyes open and look at me because I'm going to show something. Mentally, draw a horizontal line through your waist. Mentally. Parallel to the ground, a horizontal line through your waist, mentally. Now the sense of I. Where do you see it? Below the waist or above the waist? It would be really weird if you say my eye is located in my knee. No, all of us, almost I guess everybody would say it's above the waist. Very good. Now draw another line through the chest like this, parallel to the ground. Where is the sense of I? Phenomenologically, directly notice it. Is it below this line or above this line? Above, yes. Everybody says above. Now draw one more line through the neck, parallel to the ground. The sense of I, is it below this line or above? Some people might find a location of the I in the chest, but most people would say somewhere here. When I say I, it is somewhere here. And that's very natural actually, because most of the sense organs are in the head, and the face is extraordinarily sensitive. You would feel more sensation here. Eyes, nose, ears, tongue, everything is here almost more or less. Most people feel it here. All right. Now draw two lines mentally like this, trisecting the head mentally, like this. Where would the I be located? On this side. I means the ego, feeling of I. This side, here, here. Some of you are saying, how many would you say you feel it here, somewhere here? Behind the, yeah. Raise your hands if you feel that way. Most of you do that. Most of you do that. Focus there. Most people would report somewhere behind the eyes or somewhere behind the temple, somewhere you would, if you would press to give a location for the feeling of eye sensation, ego sensation is there. Stay with it. Notice one thing. First, two things you have to notice. One thing is, clearly it's an object. You are locating it. You are aware of it. It's a thing, no matter how subtle, it's a thing. Your eye sensation is a thing, and it's an ego, it's a thing. It's not you. Second thing, most important, you, the witness consciousness, are the one aware of the I just now. Does that make sense? That witness consciousness, one warning, don't ever try to catch hold of it. You'll fail. Because it's always the one trying to catch hold of it. So you cannot objectify it. Don't try to objectify it. Know that you are that. Tattvamasi. That is what you are. Okay, these are very profound questions. I will comment on it strictly from the Advaitic point of view, because you know much more about it from the medical point of view, and it's an ongoing subject of intensive research. All three: sleep, anesthesia, and death. Now first, sleep. Why, he asked, what is the Advaitic view of consciousness during sleep? Sleep has two aspects: dream sleep and deep sleep. Even physiologists would say that they have found distinct differences in REM sleep and non-REM sleep. REM sleep is rapid eye movement sleep associated with dream. I mean, if those movements are going on, if you wake up the subject, he or she will report dreaming. And non-REM sleep, the brain waves I read, they are different and associated with deep sleep. In Vedanta, they are called Swapna and Sushupti, respectively. Swapna means dream sleep and Sushupti, deep sleep. Why is it important? Why is it of concern to us? Because clearly, deep sleep, clearly in dreams we are aware. There's some kind of awareness going on because we experience. Dreams are experienced. But in deep sleep, the question mark will be, if you insist on the persistence of consciousness, deep sleep seems to be an unconscious state. Deep sleep seems to be an unconscious state. What does Vedanta say about that? Do you understand the problem? Then the response will be interesting. Vedanta says that deep sleep is a very interesting case. It proves our point. It seems to prove the opposite, that consciousness disappears. So there's no such thing as a persisting consciousness. The Vedanta says consciousness remains intact during deep sleep. The Vedantic view of consciousness is not that there is an absence of experience during deep sleep. It is an experience of absence. You see, what is the Vedantic perspective is the first person experience, and it's easy to understand because it's your experience. How do you experience waking? You experience waking as sight and sound and warmth and sensations and thoughts within. You experience dreams pretty much in the same way, though it's all in the mind. And how do you experience deep sleep? Look at the words. How do you experience deep sleep? Blankness as nothingness. Vedanta would say what has happened in deep sleep is, as we fall asleep, the gates to the world shut down. We don't transact with the world, but we watch movies in the mind, a TV show. And then that shuts down also. The dreams shut down and the mind shuts down. We are not aware of the external world. We do not dream dreams. We exist without any kind of object to experience. In deep sleep, according to Vedanta, there is consciousness but nothing for consciousness to experience. Because only when the mind wakes up, according to Vedanta, deep sleep is the sleep of the mind. Waking is the waking of the mind. Dreaming is the dreaming of the mind. Consciousness, one, unchanged. Until the mind wakes up, nothing is presented to consciousness. So consciousness is like light I'll show you something. If you can see this, it's a very interesting experiment. Here, just here. There's obviously light here. You can see light here. This place is full of light. What? This air. What? Remove my hand. Is there light? There is light. There's no object for it to reflect on. What is it? Light is light. The moment I remove it, either my hand is seen, the light is also not seen. See my hand, you see the light. Now when I remove the hand, you see the hand, you see the light either. Doesn't mean light is not there. It's there, but there's no object for the light to be reflected on. Yeah. I got this idea many, many years ago. I was in India presenting a paper in the famous Nalanda University, the site of the ancient Buddhist university. There's a modern Nalanda University there now. And my paper was on consciousness in Vedanta, pretty much same. I wanted to explain how consciousness could exist without giving any experience. What is experience and what is consciousness in Vedanta? Consciousness plus object of consciousness is experience. You are aware and there is something to see, you have experience of seeing. Aware and something to hear, you have experience of hearing, and so on. If there is no object, awareness is there, but it illumines. What does it illumine? The absence of objects. That is deep sleep. So in that conference, what happened was I was trying to explain, how do I explain this? There are professors and there are a lot of Buddhist monks also sitting there, and they had a projector. You know, they use it for PowerPoint and all, and it has a particularly strong white beam of light. But it's projecting there, and the beam comes here. You thrust your hand into that, your hand is blazing white with that light. You remove it, you can't see anything here. This is blank. That effect. So in deep sleep, there is consciousness, but no object of consciousness. I remember in the Institute of Culture in Kolkata, about 20 years ago, there was a conference, 15 years ago, there was a conference on consciousness in philosophy and neuroscience. And the neuroscientist was, they couldn't, as you might agree, as you might understand, they couldn't come to any agreement at all. The definition of consciousness itself, the philosophy professor, the Sankhya philosophy professor, who is an American, Larson, he asked a question to the neuroscientist. According to modern neuroscience, is there consciousness in deep sleep? And the neuroscientist said, no, there's no consciousness in deep sleep. And the professor Larson said, well, in Sankhya and in Vedanta, there is only consciousness in deep sleep, no object of consciousness. Okay. How do you prove that? Well, the traditional answer in Vedanta is when we wake up from deep sleep, we say, I slept happily, I didn't know anything. You know, in every culture you have expressions like this, I slept like a log. Vedanta says, how would you know that? Are you inferring it? I went to sleep at 10 o'clock, from 10 to 12 I dreamt, and then 12 to 4 nothing. So that must have been deep sleep, inferred. 12 to 4 deep sleep. We never do that. We wake up and immediately we know. There were dreams and there was peaceful. Nothing. How do you know that? So Vedanta says, in Sanskrit term is, Sukham maham aswapsam. I slept happily. Nakinchidavedisham. I did not know anything. That itself is a kind of knowledge. A knowledge of not knowing anything. Even more simply, take the simple fact, deep sleep, even before modern science and REM sleep and non-REM sleep, all these concepts, deep sleep is a concept recognized in every society in the world, every culture in the world since ancient times. How did they know such a thing is there if there is no consciousness about it? So deep sleep, there is consciousness. That is the Advaita position. Second, about coma, about anesthesia. I'll just say one thing. I know what you're talking about because I have about anesthesia, consciousness during anesthesia. Patient who went through an operation said that, Swami, deep sleep and anesthesia are not the same. Even from a perspective, first person perspective, they feel very different. Anesthesia is simply nothing, blank. Doesn't seem to be consciousness aware of nothing, not even that, not even deep sleep. You go out and you come out again. That's almost like that. So would you say consciousness is there in anesthesia? what would be the Vedantic understanding of anesthesia? Vedantic understanding would be you do something to the body which makes the mind inoperative. You basically put the mind to sleep because you're putting the whatever bodily aspect of where the mind operates. Basically, you're switching off the hardware or putting into sleep mode. So all the programs also go into hibernation there. That's what's happening from a Vedantic perspective. You're doing something to the body, that is the brain or nervous system, where the mind cannot function anymore. Consciousness just reveals that, almost like deep sleep. Now, very interesting, if you Google it, it just caught my eye. 2 weeks ago, there was a paper which was mentioned in general news also. Consciousness found in anesthesia. Anybody came across that? I came across that. If you Google it, you'll find it. Just a recent paper. It's a medical paper. What they are saying is also very interesting. Why does it feel different? This is not that consciousness is switched off during anesthesia. The memory is completely switched off during anesthesia. That's what they are saying. And that's, of course, a study on particular types of anesthesia. That's not everything. I can just offer that. Moving on to death. What happens at death is, from a Vedantic perspective again, the physical body. Remember, from the Vedantic perspective, we have 3 aspects to yourself, to each of us. Pure consciousness, unchanging light of awareness, that's what we are. A layer of the mind, which is called Sukshma Sharira, subtle body. And then the physical body, the biological body, which is born, develops, ages, dies. Now, when this physical body dies, the subtle body, Sukshma Sharira, can no longer operate it. That's what then we call it transmigration. It moves on from this body and then is reborn somewhere else in another body. It needs new hardware, or the body is wetware, they would call it. So it needs new machinery to function if the physical body is damaged beyond repair. Now, what you are saying, a Vedantic approach would be, if that frozen person, that body is damaged beyond repair, the subtle body would have left, and so it will not come back, even if you warm up that body. And if the subtle body is still there, it's waiting for you to warm it up. So do warm it up, because then it will start functioning again. But then there might be damage, physical damage. Subtle body can't work if certain parts of the brain are damaged. These are the 3 responses I would like to give. Questions? I'll come to you. Yeah. Next there. Yeah, please. Yeah, you first. Tell us your name and ask the question. And then the gentleman back there. Correct. Most of us are on autopilot unless we are suffering too much. Unless it's intensive pain. We sink into a kind of easy acceptance of things. Status quo. Nobody is perfectly happy, but we said we can't be perfectly happy. It's just like this. And we carry on. There are a few, it doesn't just take suffering. It also is a quest for knowing what is the reality, what's this entire game about? What's the point of life? What are we really? And what is this life all about? Very soon, we're going to get old and maybe get a disease and then die sooner or later, and it'll all be over probably. So what was it all about? So this question comes up, a fundamental question. I think these 2 questions, suffering and that we are confronted with an inevitable, what seems to be an end, a death. It leads to that philosophical quest. We all have it. Even when I'm okay with it, I'm relaxed, I'm okay with it. This is what just life is. I still turn up for a Vedanta talk on a nice afternoon. Why? Because I'm hoping to find some insights into life. Yes, and this has been the fundamental quest all throughout history, that such a possibility exists. It's not that this is just what life is. There is a possibility of overcoming suffering. There is a possibility of finding deep meaning and purpose in life, the deepest possible. This is the claim of not just Advaita, every spiritual tradition throughout the history of humanity. And it's how did I become a monk, for example? So when I read these books of Vivekananda as a kid, it really pulled me, because I thought, if I go the way my dad and mom have gone, I'll just do what they have done. Maybe life will be a little better, maybe a little worse, that's it. But if I pursue this, what Vivekananda says and these teachers, they say, there is such a thing as God, there is such a thing as an immortal soul, there is such a thing as finding out the secret of life. And it's not some crazy person who's saying this. This is that sort of accumulated wisdom of different religious traditions across civilizations. I thought it was really a worthwhile thing to pursue. You don't have to be a monk to pursue it, but everybody. So you want pleasure, you want success, wealth. So happy, pleasure and wealth, they were valid goals of life within the limits of dharma, morality and ethics. Now that's for everybody. But also ultimately for everybody was prescribed moksha, spiritual freedom. That there is a ultimate purpose to life. That there is something to question, who am I, what am I? The same 5 great unsolved questions of philosophy. Really, what am I? So these questions are there. And it was actually said that this is a goal for everybody. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Pleasure, wealth, dharma, that means morality. This is for everybody. And moksha is the ultimate. It was said to be parama purushartha, the highest goal of human life. So it was always recognized, not just for a few mystics, not just for a few philosophers, but for everybody in life. Yeah. The gentleman there. Yes. You, yes. Please tell us your name. Thank you for your comments. Really wonderful, really. I mean, there's so much material there. We could have another talk, but I'm not threatening you. Don't make a run for the doors. Let me start with what you ended with, the Buddhist worldview. Correct. Do you recall what I mentioned about Sam Harris? The interesting intuition he came to, that Advaita Vedanta and Dzogchen Buddhism, both of them have a core of truth. And he says it's the same truth. Here is an atheist, a fierce critic, a relentless critic of religion, who says we must admit that there is some truth to this. Now it's a very interesting subject. Buddhism and Hinduism, the Hindu schools of philosophy and the Buddhist schools of philosophy had been at loggerheads for more than 1,000 years of debate, scholarly debate, and there are records of this. But mostly you will see it was a debate between some of the Theravada schools of Buddhism and the dualistic Hindu schools like the Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Mimamsa schools, until Buddhism sort of faded out from India. Now the Advaita school has a very interesting relationship with Buddhism. If you look at the text, when they refute other schools of philosophy, they also refute Buddhism. Shankara, in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya, commentary on the Brahma Sutra Bhashya, in one place, he takes page after page to refute Vijnanavada Buddhism, the Buddhism which is very close to subjective idealism. There is a school of Buddhism which is very close to the Berkeleyan kind of subjective idealism. To perceive is to exist, like that. Shankara takes page after page to refute that. He cuts it down. When it comes to Shunyavada, the philosophy of Shunyata, Madhyamaka Buddhism of Nagarjuna, Shankara sort of strangely sidesteps the issue, He just says, in Sanskrit, Navayam niradhara brahma angikurmaha. We do not accept error without any reality, without a ground of error. It's like saying, there's a snake which is false. The classic Vedanta example, a rope which is mistaken for a snake. Similarly, Brahman is mistaken for this world. That's what they wanted to say. Now, if you say that we are mistaking it as a snake, but there's no rope, there's nothing there, but we are mistaking it as a snake, that we cannot accept. Vedanta, Shankara says that there is a reality which is being misperceived, and he lets it go at that. But if you actually go to the Buddhist texts, the original texts, the texts of Nagarjuna, Mula Madhyamaka Karika, which is the source for the entire Shunyavada movement in Buddhism, which is about 1900 years old. There, he clearly says, I'm not talking about non-existence. When I say Shunya, Shunya means the void. Void does not mean nothing. And what does it mean? He says 4 possibilities are there. This is Nagarjuna, and I'm actually supporting him. 4 possibilities are there. One is logical possibilities. One is it exists. There's some ultimate reality, it exists. Other one is it does not exist. Other one is it both exists and does not exist. And the 4th one is it neither exists nor does not exist. The 4 possible alternatives. He calls it Chatushkoti. And what is void? What is shunya? None of these four. Is it something that exists? No. Is it something that does not exist? No. Is it something that both exists and does not exist? No. Is it something that neither exists nor does not exist? No. Chatushkoti vinirmukta tattvam shunyam. So what? In the Mandukya Karika, a classic text of Advaita Vedanta, Shankara's teacher's teacher, Gaudapada, uses almost mirror language, same kind of language, to describe Brahman, the infinite. Almost the same language. Nagarjuna, the great teacher of the void, school of the void, he uses almost Advaitic language in his beginning. He uses Prapanchopashamam Shantam Shivam Advayam. What is Shunyam? The cessation of the universe, the silence of the universe. Prapanchopashamam. Shantam, peace itself. Advayam, non-dual. Shivam, he uses the word Shivam, a dual Buddhist. He means it as auspicious. And in the Mandukya Upanishad, in the 7th mantra, where the highest reality is described, what are the words? Prapanchopashamam Shantam Shivam Advaitam. Cessation of the universe, peace itself, auspiciousness itself, non-duality. Exactly the same terms used to describe Brahman and Shunyam. The pure, the way to understand this is the pure subject itself. There is no object there. It can be called the infinite, it can be called the void. It makes sense both ways. I put it this way. When you listen to Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, it seems to be describing a positive thing. It's a mistake. It's not describing a positive thing. Something called an ultimate reality, something called a witness. Witness is not a thing. It is the witness of all things, but it's not a thing in itself. And when you listen to Nagarjuna, the Buddhist, the school of the void, mistake is, it seems they're talking about nothing. They're not talking about nothing. Vedanta is not talking about a thing. Both of them are talking about no thing. Nothing, thing, no thing. The best way you can indicate that is no thing. Swami Sarvapriyananda, who wrote the authoritative biography of Sri Ramakrishna, he writes a very interesting line. He says, what the Buddhists call the void, shunyam, we call the purnam, the infinite, the whole of the infinite. Now, this is one point of view. Dr. Radhakrishnan was also to some extent of this point of view, Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. Some modern philosophers, T.R.B. Murthy and others, they agree. But also, to be fair, classical non-dualists and classical Buddhist philosophers, they're still at it. I remember I was in a conference with a Lama in Delhi. He was a Buddhist teacher, Tibetan Lama. And I gave a talk on consciousness in Advaita Vedanta. He gave a talk in consciousness in Tibetan Buddhism. And after that, a lady stood up and asked, it seems, she asked the Lama, it seems, sir, what the Swami talked about and what you talked about, this seems to be the same. And he said, no, they are not the same. There are differences. And I said, yes, there are differences. Actually, the approach is different. Being a Hindu, we always tend to synthesize. They all lead to the same goal. They're all true. And so I said, there are different approaches, but they lead to the same goal. He was having none of that. He's, of course, very, very sweet and gentle man. So I said, they all lead to the same goal. And immediately he said, yes, same goal, but afterwards again different. One just little comment on what, I agree entirely with what you said first. One little comment on what you said. To exist is to exist as an object. Vedanta would reverse that. The only thing that really exists as such is Brahman, which is not an object. It lends existence to every object. Eckhart would call it the ground of being. Yes. I love that story. I've told it so many times. Alan Watts. He was in the Bay Area in San Francisco in the 60s. Nobody reads much of him these days. But his books are a treasure, really. He's very humorous, mischievous a little sometimes. He taught Vedanta and Buddhism. And popularized it in San Francisco in the Bay Area in the 60s, I think. 60s, 70s also. So he says there that, Oh, if religion is the opium of the masses, then I must say that the Hindus have the inside dope. But the story he tells is very interesting. It sort of explains all of this very nicely. And it's a child story. He's made it up himself. He says, what is all this? What's going on? And he says, it's like this. God alone existed from all time, from eternity to eternity. But being alone from eternity to eternity, he got a little bored. So he wanted to play. Now, whom will he play with? Because only God exists. There's nothing else. Whom will he play with? So he thought about it. And because he was God, he's awfully clever, so he hit upon a solution. God pretended to be not God. God pretended to be not God. Now God has somebody to play with. Who? God playing with God pretending to be not God. Now the problem arose was, because he is God, he is awfully good at what he does. So when he pretended to be not God, he totally forgot that he was God. And that is the universe. It is God searching for God. That's what's going on from eternity to eternity. But it's a little like a fairy tale, like a little fable, but it's really deep. I mean, Advaita would agree with that entirely. I think we have almost run out of time. Let's have one. Yes, you're there. Yes, the gentleman there. You're asking what happened to consciousness. What Vedanta would say there is, because of the tremendous shock there, at that moment your sensory system and mind, maybe they got a shock and it did not register, right? So it was filtered out by the sense. A lot of data which is coming into the senses is filtered out at some level before it comes to our conscious experience. So it did not come to conscious experience. What happens often is when we are knocked out by an anesthesia or by a blow to the head, it's the mind which goes to sleep, and hence we don't register anything in the world. But the consciousness which registers the mind getting information from the senses in the world, sidewalk, car coming and all of that, when the mind shuts down, just like deep sleep, the consciousness experiences no information coming in, blank. And then again the mind awakes. So this difference is just like waking, dreaming, deep sleep, coma, anesthesia. All of these effects are on the body and the mind. And the consciousness just keeps revealing what is happening. Yes. All right, then. All right, last. There, the gentleman. Yes. Tell us your name and ask the question. Okay. The second question is actually a very profound question. The first one is, what is mind? How does it function? It's a general question. Every philosophy, including modern positive psychology, has its own answers. And Vedanta, as I said, precisely defines everything. Mind is a broad term. Vedanta has very precise words for them, for this thing. Vedanta will call it the subtle body. And in Vedanta, the subtle body has actually three components. The pranamaya kosha, which you might consider to be like the battery of your mobile phone, the source of energy and power. Literally life forces. Second is the manomaya kosha, which includes what we call the mind. Again, there are precise definitions. Memory, ego, and sense organs. The sensory inputs. And there is something called the Vijnanamaya Kosha, which is the intellect itself and the sense of kartritva, that the doership. So those things are there. Each of them has precise definitions and functions. That's one way of mapping what we call the mind. There are other ways also. Second, your question, single witness or many witnesses? That's really a good question. If you followed what we did, I am different from the world, I am different from the body, I am different from the mind, I am the witness of mind, body and world. Immediately you get the sensation that, you get the intuition that in every body there is a different witness. But you would be wrong. According to Vedanta, it is one consciousness shining through different bodies and minds. Now your question is, in fact in the Bhagavad Gita, this thing starts in, this topic is there in the 13th chapter, where Krishna speaks about field and knower of the field. The body is the field, kshetra, and the witness within the field is the knower of the field, the witness consciousness within. How many of these witness consciousnesses? Billions of bodies, or billions of witness consciousness? Or is it one? And Krishna in the 13th chapter, in a very startling half a verse, he makes a tremendous declaration. Kshetragyam chapi mam vidhi sarva kshetreshu bharata. O Arjuna, Know me alone to be the one consciousness in all these fields. So in one sentence he answers both your question and also gives the definition of God in Vedanta. There is only one consciousness in all bodies and minds, and that one consciousness in all bodies and minds is God, or Saguna Brahman in Vedanta. Now your question actually was, how do you make that jump? Okay, let me leave you with this thought. Why are there not different witnesses? Witness consciousness, clearly bodies are different. You can see, you can count. Clearly minds are different. What you know, I do not know. What he has experienced, she has not experienced. So minds are different. Personalities are different. Physical body different, subtle body different. But witness consciousness, is it different or not? Sankhya philosophy would say yes. Yoga philosophy would say yes. Advaita would say no. It is one common witness consciousness. You know, if you ask them, prove it, Advaita will say, prove that they are different. Why do you say bodies are different? Because you can clearly prove it, that bodies are different. You can see the differences in the bodies. How do you say minds are different? You can show the differences in the mind. Show the difference in consciousness? You cannot. Why would you say consciousnesses are different? Because there are different experiences. Well, different experiences are because of different bodies. The Sankhya philosophy, there's a long debate about this. Sankhya philosophy says each person is a different pure consciousness. And they defend it with arguments, basically fundamentally 5 arguments. None of them work. You can knock them out right now. If it is one consciousness, then when one person falls asleep, everybody would fall asleep. Is that true? What would be the answer? You tell me. Body falls asleep, mind falls asleep. Why would another body or mind fall asleep if this body and mind falls asleep? Consciousness might be the one illumining the sleeping body and mind here, illumining the active body and mind there. Next argument, the death of one would be the death of everybody? No. Death of one is the death of one body. Why would it be the death of anybody else? Next argument, little more subtle. The liberation of one, enlightenment of one, would be the enlightenment of everybody? No. Enlightenment and ignorance and enlightenment are in the mind. They are not in pure consciousness. Mind is ignorant, mind is enlightened. Consciousness itself illumines the enlightened mind. And the enlightenment mind just realizes my real nature is consciousness, it's not body-mind. That's it. So all of the arguments actually fail. Sankhya gives those arguments because of some metaphysical constraint. Sankhya has to give those arguments, but really none of them stand. That's a good point to end. The oneness of all existence. We are all one existence. Interesting, Vivekananda said he has taught only 2 things. That the divinity within each of us, which is the pure consciousness we talked about, and the oneness of all existence, that it is one consciousness in all beings, in fact one existence which is appearing as many. It's wonderful to end on this note, and you have been a wonderful and patient audience. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you.